Thank you for joining us on the second day of the summit as we talk about stewarding our affordable housing. Today we're going to be talking about models for managing rental housing. So after you've acquired your first home, apartment building, rooming house, whatever it may be, what are some of the strategies and models that you can use to administer the rental housing? So anything from leasing up to responding to maintenance requests and et cetera. My name is Fatema Jivaji. I'm a lawyer at Iler Campbell, and we're going to be joined by a panel of different CLTs in Ontario who've employed different models and strategies for how they administered their rental housing. So so this is just a quick agenda of like what we'll discuss. We'll talk about the different models and the kind of decisions that go into what makes sense for your organization, what makes sense for their organizations. Our panel today is Alia from Circle Community Land Trust. They have over 500 single-family homes all over the city of Toronto. That they acquired through Toronto Community Housing, and they decided that they would manage and maintain all of the homes internally, and she'll talk about how they made those decisions and what it meant to build out an organization like that. Next, we'll hear from Josh from Parkdale. Parkdale also acquired over 80 of the same homes, but Parkdale also has some rental buildings, and for the homes, they decided to use a head lease structure with the YWCA, where the YWCA is a commercial tenant, and they administer their housing on behalf of Parkdale. And Josh will talk about why they decided to go that route. Next, we'll hear from Mike from Ottawa Community Land Trust, and they have a property manager as opposed to a commercial tenant, and Mike will talk about what their organization was thinking about when they decided to retain a property manager. And Zack from Kensington I think your organization does a little bit of everything, and partly that's because you have some commercial properties, and he'll talk about what their hybrid model looks like. So they do a little bit more internally, and then their property manager maybe does not the full suite of what a property manager would do. So when you're thinking about what models you might want to employ, there's a variety of considerations. I think probably the most important is the type of housing. A single-family home portfolio around a large geographic area is very different to manage than a multi-purpose or purpose-built rental unit that is in one location. And maybe finding a housing provider that will manage single-family homes around the city is harder to do than, a 12-unit building. So it might be like, just by virtue of not having any housing providers, you might be kind of forced to manage your own properties. And secondly, it's the goals of the organization and the internal capacity. If the goal of the organization is to acquire as many properties and preserve them in perpetuity, you might want to focus your internal capacity on that and not actually build out a whole property management infrastructure internally, and it might just be easier for you to have someone, a service provider that you partner with and is like aligned with you and your goals to do that for you on your behalf. Governance structure have a big impact on what you pick. I know for Parkdale, they have a charitable arm that holds all the properties as owners, and then you're really contained within the CRA rules of what's in your charitable registration and what you're able to do, and sort of what agreements you can enter into with other organizations. There's strict rules on who the service providers are, or maybe your purposes are drafted in a very specific way that limits who you can partner with, or if you can partner with other organizations at all. And that's something you might want to think about, especially if you're a land trust seeking charitable registration, or you might think in the future you want to be charitable registered, then it's important to look at how your purposes are going to limit some of the decisions you can make downstream. Your geographic location, if you operate in a very small town, or it is, a town that doesn't have very many housing providers, you might not have an option. Conversely, if you operate in a very big city, all the housing providers are very busy and there's no shortage of work, and depending on what your needs are, they might not be anyone available anyways, or it'd be harder to make those partnerships. The state of the rental housing, I think, is important. If you have a brand new building with limited capital repairs, the maintenance requests will be fairly simple. You might find that the capacity to do that in-house might be more manageable than older homes requiring big capital repairs that you're going to be undertaking over like a long period of time, because you have to like put tenants elsewhere and then bring them back. All of that takes a lot of time. And each of the panel members are going to sort of give you an idea of what it costs. So how much of their rental revenue they actually spend on a service provider, or how much rent they get off of a commercial lease to support the organization, help it grow, and so on. So I will hand it over to Alia.
Morning. Okay, so I'm Alia Abaya, the CEO for Circle, and I'll walk you through, as Fatema mentioned, our portfolio, how we manage it, how we made some certain decisions, associated costs, risks, and hopefully some of that's useful for you if you're embarking on a startup like we were in the past almost 3 years. Okay, so the next slide, please. Oh. Yeah, so my quick overview is like the intro to who we are in our portfolio, the intentions that we set with our work, the model we're following, how we manage it from a tenant experience, and our experiences regarding challenges and opportunities. Thanks. Okay, so this one's really cool, Circle's origin story, and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go into this in greater detail in a later presentation. But if you don't make it to that, I really encourage you to visit our website because it's all documented there. It's an incredible story full of drama where tenants rose up basically to stop the sale of these homes, and we even archived some of interviews with those tenants. I'll share one little tidbit that I couldn't believe it when I heard this, but one of the ways the tenants found out is that a counselor actually was holding a news conference in front of their house announcing the sale of the homes, and the tenant happened to be home and heard this, and that's how they found out. So it's a pretty exciting story, especially because it has a happy ending with where we landed today. But basically, TCH over the years amassed hundreds of single-family homes across the city. There was over 900 at one point. It's really hard to property manage single-family homes that are scattered, and so they were falling into disrepair faster than they could be repaired. And of course, this was like a decade or more ago. The rising real estate value of Toronto, they just decided to sell off all the houses. But then they eventually voted to pass them to a nonprofit or co-op or land trust, except there was no one big enough to take them all, and that's how Circle got formed. And today that's a map of just to give you an idea of how scattered they are. And today so that was in 2022 when we launched with the first staff person, that was me, and now we have 25 FTEs, and we property manage everything ourselves and do tenant services. And I do want to say one really interesting thing about our portfolio that's like a zoomed in to show you how within a neighborhood they might be scattered, is that we have every single typology of house essentially represented in Toronto, and a lot of volume of that. So heritage houses, row houses, suburban houses from the 70s. So that gives us access to really interesting data when we're trying to do retrofits or making decisions at scale about renovation. Okay. That's just another example in the Malvern neighborhood. And one thing I want to point out about our homes, I didn't draw the line in the map, but Circle's homes were built across multiple treaties. And so to the west of Woodbine Avenue, we're covered by Treaty 13, and to the east, we're covered by the Williams Treaties. But in 2015, the Mississauga of the Credit submitted a land claim to the government claiming unextinguished title to those lands of the William Treaties. So, it's important when we talk about our homes that they recognizing that they sort of exist in that context. Okay, so the next slide, please. So we wanted to be really intentional when we started out about what our goals were. And so we wanted to, like, you know, Circle was formed to protect and preserve the housing stock, bring everything to a state of good repair, reduce harmful environmental impacts, increase accessibility, et cetera, improve the tenant experience. But then when we really wanted to understand what that meant, we were like, oh, we're more seeking to address the financialization of housing, and we want to improve opportunities for generational wealth and social mobility. We want to destigmatize affordable housing, and we wanted to dismantle forms of oppression in our systems. Okay. And so how do we do that in practice? We knew from tenants, like, the number one perspective from their view was that being an exceptional landlord and providing great property management and maintenance service was the number one goal. And so obviously managing 560 plus houses, 600 homes, because some of the houses are multiplexes, and over 2,000 tenants is an incredible amount of work. But we elected to self-manage because we wanted the opportunity to, like, have those relationships with the tenants, to maintain control for us over the work that was being done. We recognized that a lot of the big capital decisions that we wanted to make were being executed in the day-to-day maintenance, and so we wanted to be able to be nimble and reactive and respond quickly. And we also wanted to have a really close relationship with our tenants around RGI. So we administer all the RGI, that's rent geared to income, because our houses are 100% subsidized rent geared to income homes. And we wanted to be able to, like, have those conversations with them about that process. And then that gives us the opportunity to, like, work with the city together and advocate for the tenants where possible. Okay, thanks. So some of our challenges and opportunities. When we launched, our department structure was an asset management and capital department as one, a tenant services department, a tenant engagement department, and an admins and operating, including finance. And we had none of our own data. So, like, we inherited all these houses, and they were inaccurate data, like most of it from 2016. And so we basically had to redo everything and, like, figure out what was what. And we also knew that the tenants, although the arrears didn't transfer with our portfolio, we knew on the books there was a record of over 300,000 in arrears. And so there was those histories of, you know, habits that we needed to work with tenants to change. And in the first 2 years of our transfer, we definitely saw that with our arrears escalating to over 130,000. And so today, through a massive undertaking and administrative effort, and the work of our, like, COO actually implementing a pilot program, we were able to reduce that. Our arrears are actually going down about 30 to 50K every month, which is amazing, and we've had 0 evictions so far. And those are, like, a testament to the work that we've been able to do and manage internally, so that's great. Although there were, I'm sure one of our board members is here, some stressful meetings in the first couple of years. So that's one of the opportunities, is, like, being able to, like, advocate and work with tenants to, like, make change. And also, because we're doing everything internally, we work with the city to, like, one of the data points that was incorrect was our houses were incorrectly labeled. And so correcting that data, because we're funded by the type of housing, we were able to work with them to adjust the type of units we had to, like, better have funding from the city. And I think that might be the last slide. Oh, yeah. Oh, and so this is our model, is that we're 100% RGI, so our operating costs are completely covered by our rental income, and then our repair plan is funded through a CMHC loan, and that's to bring the houses all up into a state of good repair, which to us is, like, part of that becoming a good landlord and actively, like, providing a housing that's, like, meets today's standard. And then the surplus from that, from our rental income, is invested to, like, pay off the loan in the future. And by investing in the houses and bringing them up to a good state of good repair, we're working towards, like, destigmatizing affordable housing overall. That's it.
Thank you, Zack. Awesome. Yeah, you guys are doing such great work. So nice to hear about it. We're like in a parallel process, but with a different model. So there's some comparison. So yeah, I work with the Neighbourhood Land Trust, also known as Parkdale's Neighbourhood Land Trust. And we have a housing operating partner lease model. So we lease our properties to housing partners who provide property management and tenant services. And we are the asset manager. Yeah, so this is Parkdale, South Parkdale, North Parkdale, and that's where our work begins and focuses primarily. When we got started, we're dealing with a community which has a high percentage of low-income people, 88% renters in a gentrifying context, where a majority of tenants are experiencing, evictions, high rent increases, and displacement, et cetera. Also, a history of organizing in our community. And part of that history of organizing led to there being a big social service network of organizations. So when we start, we know there's a housing crisis. The housing crisis is escalating, but there are actually many organizations working on providing services to tenants, and many of them were actually housing providers already with capacity to operate housing, and different focuses in terms of who they provided housing and supports to. So when we get started, we think about that, like what role are we going to play? We know that there's a new pressure on the rental housing in the community, and there's a need for a community response, but we're not necessarily starting from a point where we think there needs to be new operators. Those operators had historically had capacity to develop. With disinvestment in housing by the 90s, they had to fire their development staff. They had managed their housing for a decade or a few decades, and held on with that management capacity, but had lost their development capacity. So we thought the Land Trust can play the role of identifying the community needs, acquiring sites, securing funding and financing, being the asset manager, but then providing those properties back to those housing providers who have experience to provide the services to tenants. So we're filling a gap rather than trying to do the whole activity. We're working in partnership to do that. So our work starts with actually identifying the need. What is the actual need in the community? We started with rooming house preservation, leading to our first project where we acquired this 15-unit building. We did all the advocacy that led to the funding being available. We acquired the property, secured the funding and financing, implemented a renovation, initial renovation of the project, and leased the project to a local supportive housing organization called Park, who was one of our early partners. And so they provide the property management in-house, and also support services. They manage the rent geared to income and other subsidies that tenants access. And then we're responsible for the long-term capital repairs to the building, and I'll speak more about what that actually means. Yeah, so that's a photo with us, some staff from Park, our partner, and so we kind of work together and we celebrate together. Our wins are their wins are our wins. This is the building next door, which we acquired a few years later. It's called 22 Maynard, 36 units. And this is a project which we now lease to another organization called St. Felix Center, who operates a transitional housing project, a number of respite sites, and then also rental housing with supports. And they've come in to operate this building, providing property management and support services to some tenants who are accessing that. They also manage rent geared to income subsidies for eligible tenants. So a similar model here, except this is supportive housing and this is affordable rental housing, where a few tenants are accessing some low-level supports. We eventually ended up seeing this opportunity and to contribute to the preservation of scatter homes that were formerly owned by Toronto Community Housing. This is Parkdale. So, we start our work here trying to preserve housing primarily in the rental market, but we do see that there's an opportunity to preserve the rental housing that had been sold priorly and might be at risk, and to expand our capacity and impact. When the city was deciding who they were going to transfer these properties to, you had the obligation to bid on a bundle. You couldn't say we wanted these 10 properties in Parkdale. You had to bid on a bundle, and this is the bundle that the Parkdale properties were in. So through that, the way that the city managed this transfer process, we were forced to consider taking on a larger portfolio, and we didn't have local partners active in Parkdale who we had relationships with who had that capacity to manage a portfolio across this type of region. And so what it meant is finding a partner who had that larger capacity, who had existing systems and teams working across a large geography. So we ended up working with an organization called YWCA Toronto, And this is great. It was a historic organization that had tons of capacity to operate affordable rental housing, supportive housing, and also has like many other social service programs. Also, we were aligned with them in their interest in sort of accomplishing, providing the housing to women-led households, which for us was kind of in alignment with some of our goals. So we partnered with them. We provide them a long-term lease, and they are they're the housing partner. They provide the property management, so the day-to-day maintenance. They receive the rent. They're technically the landlord to the tenants. And they also provide tenant services. And we are the asset manager, so we manage the financing and the capital projects and any potential redevelopment. And we work collaboratively with them. They have an office, we have an office above their office in one of our homes. And we meet regularly. Chantal's over here. She's our property asset manager. She meets with their operating team. They talk about how to collaborate between the property management team at the Y and our asset management team that's implementing the renovations in these same homes. So we call ourselves an asset management focused CLT, which is really different than your model, and there's definitely benefits and disadvantages. A lot of our work, about half our staff team, is focusing at all times on planning and implementing capital projects, which are renovation projects on the homes. And that has to be done in coordination with the property management team at the Y, but also with tenants who we have to consult with and engage with. So while the Y is doing the day-to-day maintenance and responding to tenant needs and concerns, we are planning those longer-term repair programs and repair projects. It also, our model also allows us to focus on expansion. We have a mandate from our community to increase the amount of affordable and supportive housing that is under community ownership and permanently affordable. And so having a team that's focused on the asset management and development versus getting pulled into the weeds of day-to-day management allows us to continue to actually fulfill that mandate with a pretty small team. So this is an example of a project that site you saw earlier, 22 Maynard, our second property. We're planning an intensification project to add 9 new accessible units on a fourth floor, and other accessibility and sustainability improvements to the building. And then this is a project we're bidding on right now. It's a piece of city-owned land where we're proposing to build a 16-story rental building with 171 units. So from our perspective, these are activities we wouldn't necessarily have the bandwidth to undertake if we were the full managers of our properties, but through partnership, we're able to do more than our small community organization could have done alone. And then also we have capacity to invest in these new activities. It has community space. It's it's land lease from the city if we get it. So it's gonna have community space at the bottom, so like nonprofits. Last thing to say is that as a community owner of land, we think that also allows us to control the economic activity that circulates through that land and housing. And the land trust can work to develop strategies to make sure that investment is actually creating other community benefits such as work, training, et cetera. And we're able to kind of, through our asset managed work and our relationship with our partners, try to implement that across our portfolio, even though we're not necessarily doing the day-to-day management, but we can like focus on policies, processes, and other partnerships that allow us to accomplish that. Last thing I'll say, because you asked us to talk about cost, is that one disadvantage of our model is that we're not getting the day-to-day rent. We charge an at-cost lease basically to our partners. Our lease requires them to pay us the amount we have to pay to our lenders for the financing, reimburse us for insurance costs and other direct costs of the property. And we charge a very small asset management fee that allows us to maintain asset management staff. Then when we do capital projects, we charge a fee to the capital projects to help sustain project management staff to manage those projects. So our revenue is dependent on consistent activity and getting to a pretty large scale, which we're not yet at. So our model depends on getting to a bigger scale where those small amounts of revenue from each project and from the projects we implement can sustain our staff. Where, you heard they have 25 staff paid for by the rents. So there's a bit of a more stability that they have more stability in terms of being able to maintain and retain a consistent staff team. So there's a disadvantage from that revenue perspective, but I mean, I think if we can get the scale, we can close that challenge point, but I just name that as something to consider.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah. So interesting that that last theme was around growing to scale, because we're going to scale back a little bit further yet, from over 500 units to a couple of hundred units to 2 buildings in Ottawa, and I'm going the wrong way. So I wanted to start just a little bit. So I'm with the Ottawa Community Land Trust. Just start a little bit. We're a pretty new organization. We were born in 2021, and I won't go into detail on this slide, but we sort of have 2 origin stories, and one of them is about sort of reorganizing the community housing sector to ensure that we can leverage the portfolio that exists across a whole array of different organizations. We won't talk too much about that, but the second one is really we recognized, or the housing community, I think, recognized that we were losing a lot of that naturally occurring affordable housing. And so the Land Trust was kind of incorporated as a sort of a dedicated vehicle within Ottawa to try to raise capital and try to buy and preserve some of this affordable housing that was at risk. There was no sense that we wanted to be another competitor within the space of housing providers. Rather recognize there's great capacity, great expertise there, but rather if we could purchase and then kind of immediately lease to operators across a whole spectrum, right? Supportive housing, affordable housing, different kinds of models. And so that last very point there is around, I think, we were probably looking a little bit more to the Parkdale model of building a portfolio, but letting others who have that expertise run those properties. And so in the last 2 years, I guess our primary focus has been trying to find ways of raising capital to do this work of preservation. And so as of now, we have 2 properties, so very humble beginnings. Ironically, so the one closed 2 weeks ago. Ironically, they both closed on October 3. So October 3 is now acquisition day for CLTs across the country. So we have one building that's 10 units and one building that is 6 units. So our first purchase in April of 2023. So this is really on the ground, right? Like this is pretty bare bones stuff that I'm talking about. When we put our first offer in and signed our first agreement to purchase, the seller had given us 120 days. I think we were still a new organization in the city, and even other, I'll call them partners or others within sort of the affordable housing and co-op housing sector knew about us, but I wouldn't say that the Land Trust had a really advanced conversation with any one particular organization around, this is the kind of lease model we're anticipating. And so we had this offer accepted, and we kind of reached out to a few potential partners, and I think it was met with, this is curious, but this is going to take a lot of conversation. And we realized that time was ticking now that we had this APS, and so then invited a couple of property managers that we knew had experience in the community sector. One who responded really positively, had been a real supporter of the Land Trust since our inception, and so I think was willing to kind of walk with us in a property management contract and learn how we can do this work. It's a bit of a new kind of exercise in Ottawa. So that was Housing Managers Collective, and we signed, and so they manage a lot of the co-ops in Ottawa, very familiar with rent subsidies, drawing folks from the wait list, the kind of population that we wanted to create more housing for. So that is a very basic property management contract. They're responsible for financial management, property maintenance, tenancy administration at turnovers, things like that. So, but the board and our asset development committee, that is a board committee, really wanted to keep a pretty close eye and really use this also as a learning opportunity, right? What kind of work are we encountering? What does the turnover look like? What kind of issues are we encountering with tenants, et cetera? And so there's quite a bit of oversight still coming from that board committee. When we purchased our second property over the last couple of months, we had a shorter time frame even than the first one, and I think given we are also in the midst of a capital raise with our first bond campaign, I think we sort of said, let's just add this. Housing Managers was willing to take this one on as well. We're continuing to learn a lot. We're still making a lot of mistakes, figuring out what those boundaries are between what would we put in a lease if we go that route, what do we want to kind of hold on to. I think learning lots from groups like Parkdale around the differentiation between sort of the asset management versus property management, et cetera. And so as of today, so both of our properties are managed by Housing Managers Collective. So I think that a couple of things that we're learning, because we still aspire to that idea of entering into long-term leases that allow us to become a little bit more hands-off. We're still a new organization, and building those partnerships takes time. And I think that we're comfortable with now, but I think we still I know, in time for our next kind of AGM in the spring, I think the board, we would really like to have at least one lease in place. So we still kind of aspire to move there. But yeah, that kind of relationship building takes time. I think we're still sort of spelling out what those lease parameters would be, and I think have a lot to learn from other organizations like both Circle and Parkdale. I think our board has expressed a pretty strong interest in staying quite hands-on as we are still learning in this work. But I think a few other things to keep in mind is, the acquisition of a fully tenanted building is admittedly of less interest to some organizations than maybe one might have thought. And in a way that seems so obvious, because I think organizations are working with a particular clientele or tenant base and they want housing solutions for them. And so saying, here's a 10-unit building, oh, it's fully tenanted, doesn't necessarily address that concern. So I think, we heard some comments yesterday about, some of this work I think is about preserving affordability. And in general, we're doing that, but that's a very particular slice of this vision. And so we're working that out. And then I think the buildings that we've bought so far, 6 units and 10 units, are also not necessarily of interest to organizations that are trying to work at scale, right? So I think, one day when we can buy a 50 or 100 unit building, I think that equation might change and there might be more interest, but I think the 6 and 10 units, the kind of model that we have right now, is working well. I would say the one surprise in this is that it has meant that, so we hired in the spring a very part-time kind of operations manager to support the property manager, because that's work that we hadn't necessarily anticipated needing to take on. And then just a couple of quick kind of considerations in moving forward. I think that, there is value, I think, in managing both of our properties by the same operator, and I think as we go forward, I shouldn't say operator, the property manager, and as we go forward, continuing in that, because I think there are some efficiencies that would allow us to shift capital from one site to another, as opposed to if we have multiple leases with different organizations. I mean, all of these points could go into more detail. I think the lease arrangements and payments would need to be scoped. Obviously, when does that kind of lease fee get collected? As a new organization, cash flow is still a big part of every decision that we make, so we would need to be thinking about that. And I think lastly, we aspire to assist in scaling affordable housing, including the operations of current actors, but maybe this looks a bit different than we first envisioned. So I think this property management company, perhaps we grow out a more robust community-based property management company in the city, and I think there's increasing interest in that, and I think that might be a direction that we go. And then last slide, I think as we move towards this vision of a community-owned portfolio, which is a little bit to that first origin story I was talking about, I think now we are seeing some really concrete opportunities where we might be able to buy and immediately lease. And so so 3 very active conversations with organizations that are, one organization that's meeting the settlement and housing needs of asylum claimants, another that is offering rooming houses and they're about to lose one of their buildings. They lease from a private owner who wants to sell, and so this organization would like to find another property, not interested in buying, and so we would love to buy something and lease to them. And then lastly, an affordable housing seniors group that, again, doesn't really have the capital to buy, but would like to sort of work with us. So, I think that vision, there's still a lot of space for that vision to be enacted, but it is very much a partnership, co-created kind of vision as we go. And I think I will leave it there.
I'm gonna go back a lot here. Where am I aiming this at?
I think that way.
No, I think it's out here.
there you
got it. Just move slow.
Oh wow, it goes really slow. Please be patient. Okay. Where's it going? I'm just trying to get to that map. Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. So my name's Zack. I'm with the Kensington Community Land Trust. I know we have some Americans in the summit today, so does everyone know where Kensington Market is? No? Okay, so we are in Toronto. We are located in pretty in the middle of downtown Toronto, and we are a tight-knit, small, very eclectic, very vibrant community. It's very well known within the city of Toronto, and I'd say across Canada and maybe internationally about who we are and what we do. But I wanted to quickly show just the scale of it, because when we're talking about community, we're talking about organizing, it's a very, very tiny piece. There it is right there. So the models that we're looking at and the things we're going forward is we're talking about scalability, but we're talking on a very micro level. So a lot of the ideas and policies that we're shaping right now and our ideas aren't about seeking 100-unit apartments because they just don't exist in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood's very much filled with 2 to 3 story old Victorian buildings that have commercial spaces blasted through in the main area and maybe a weird shed in the back, and there's some laneway houses, and then there's a few 5-story buildings, but where we're not looking at the mass scale, so it's something that we're thinking of our head. So that was the... Yeah, that'd be great, thank you. I'm using other people's slides, which is always fun. So we're a community organization, like a community land trust. We were able to acquire a building in 2021, which is really exciting. The building has 12 residential apartments in it on the 2nd and 3rd story, and on the main floor we have commercial spaces. So we have 5 commercial spaces. The building we acquired was fully tenanted when we bought it. So it wasn't like we bought a building, we sought out an operating partner to fill it, to fill the units. Like whenever I talk about this, people always say, how'd you find your tenants? And it's like, oh, we didn't find them, they were there, They kind of found us, right? So when we took over the building, we seeked out property management contracting services. So I don't like to say that we partnered with them because they're not a partner. They're a company and we pay them. And that's an interesting relationship that we're working on right now because when we take over the building, it didn't make sense in that moment to seek out a head lease, to have an operating partner in the building. Same thing, things move so fast when you're going through this opportunity to buy a piece of land that it seemed at that opportunity the best idea was to contract property management services. So that's been 3 years in the making, and it's been an interesting relationship. I have concerns, but I also see the benefits of it. We as an organization have been, building out our capacity and learning through the process, and we've had a few failed acquisition attempts and other partnership ideas over the last few years. Thankful to note that we've been able now to enter into an agreement of purchase and sale, so to buy our 2nd property. So that's going to hopefully close in November. There's another site that we're looking at getting, and then we've put an application into the Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Fund, which is a grant from the City of Toronto to help acquire more land. So we just applied for $1.6 million, and I'm pretty confident or hopeful about that. We'll see how it goes. Does that mean we could acquire, potentially a 3rd or a 4th site in the next bit? So there's some expansion happening in our neighborhood, but like I said, we're a very small community. So we took the model of working with a property management firm, and then what they do is they manage the day-to-day affairs of the building. So they collect the rent, they'll deal with the tenants. If someone's toilet breaks in their unit, they reach out to the property management firm. This firm probably gives about 6 hours, 7 hours a week. So our property manager will come onto site to meet tenants, but it's not like we have someone in-house all the time. So the units we operate are market rent units. We don't do supportive housing at the moment. It's very much like a regular landlord-tenant relationship. The idea is for the land trust is we're just trying to fill that space. That there's a lot of private landlords in our neighborhood that were offering affordable rents for a long time. We're just trying to fill that void and take that again. We're not trying to overreach what our role is as a landlord. And I think this model works okay for now. But the issue I've been having recently is we went to acquire our 2nd site. I reached out to the firm and I said, hey, can we extend your services and keep the same property manager? And the site we're looking at is a smaller one because they're all small in our community. It's only 3 units. And they said, oh yeah, our minimum we'll do per building is $1,000 per month. And then I equated that, I compared it to our revenue, and I'm like, oh, that's like 14% of our revenue that would be on that site, right? Our existing building is only 7% of our revenue goes towards property management. So, and they're not willing to budge on that now. So that's a conversation that we're having now with other property management firms is do we get another one? How do we go about this? So this is all kind of fresh and happening right now. So what I've been thinking is that, as we can scale as an organization, it might make sense for us to hire our own staff in-house to become a property manager. Because a lot of this is being done in collaboration with myself. So it's like I'm one of our full-time staff members. Up until, a few months ago, I was the only full-time staff member. So kind of doing a lot of stuff at once. So it's a lot of calling the property manager and her being like, oh, this tenant doesn't pay rent. And me going, okay. And she going, what do you want to do? So it's like a lot of that coming back to me and me being like, I don't know, we're paying you, right? And then So it feels a lot of times that like, she's like, okay, we'll evict them. And I'm like, well, no, that's not the goal, right? Like, it's like, so it's a lot of times with this company, it's like they're really helpful and they have a process and they manage thousands of units across the city. But to be honest, they don't give a shit about our building the way that I give a shit about our building. They don't give a shit about the community the way I do, right? So it's like understanding that where it's like no matter who you partner with, unless they're in the community and they're from the community or they work in the community, they just don't care the same level you want to. And I think that's a worry we have about operating with nonprofit partners across the city. Someone like Wood Green or TNG or the other big ones we have in the city is they operate all across the city. So their goal is those units, but their goal isn't the community. And I think that's something that we really want to espouse going forward is if we can find a way to keep someone on our team and we can, as we acquire more and more sites, every year we take a portion of that revenue from the rent and that helps pay off our position. Maybe we can create one property manager on our team that, you know, as we grow, it gets more and more cost efficient. And we've been in conversations with neighboring, you know, housing providers, or we share a very porous boundary with the Chinatown Land Trust. So I was talking to them last week being like, what are you going to do when you get a property manager? Like, it just makes sense for us to kind of share, right? So maybe there's ideas that way about sharing with your neighbors. So something about our organization, we learn it from Parkdale, we learn it from other folks, is that the idea of mutual aid, the ideas of like understanding the whole process, right? Tracking your money all the way down. And right now we're trying to do better at that. You know, can we hire local contractors? Can we work with local companies, right? And property management's our biggest line item that's not local. So it's like, how do we ensure that happens? So yeah, I'd say that like, it's been a great process for us. It allows us to scale really fast. So if I want to go buy a property in 2 months, I can just call this property management company and they'll sign a contract and they'll have a property manager ready for us. We don't need to like, you know, hire a new process, enter these lengthy partnerships. So it is helpful that it's not a partnership, right? So it's like something that I would recommend to, if you're a new CLT and you're starting up and you want to buy a piece of land, it's like it might be the easiest option is to seek a like-minded either social enterprise, cooperative, or private property management firm to work with you to quickly act. And then, you know, as you grow, there's different models you can take about becoming all internal, seeking out, you know, these nonprofit partnerships, head leases, or the model that we're trying to explore. So maybe in a year or two, I can come back here and say, don't do that, it did not work. We took on way too much and we don't know what we're talking about. Or, you know, we might say it's a really good model. Just one more thing was that we work with another organization in our community called St. Clair's Multi-Faith Housing Society. We're entering into a partnership with them right now. I don't want to get too much into it, but it's a parking lot in our neighborhood. For like 7 years, we've been advocating that it should be housing, and then finally the city's going to build housing on it. They did this big bid. Who wants to operate the site? It's going to be supportive housing. We're like, oh, we don't do supportive housing, but someone in our community does do this model. So we partnered with them, we applied for the bid, and we got it. So we're going to be managing 78 units of supportive housing, which is insane. Yeah. But for this site, we're just going to be on the head lease. It's kind of a community partnership, and the St. Clair model is really interesting. What they do is they're the manager of the property, and they work with third-party partners who provide the support services to their tenants. So for each of their buildings, they would have 7 to 10 different types of supporting partners that would manage the units individually, but not the building as a whole. So I think that's an interesting model that we're thinking about in the future is as we scale, can we be talking to services that provide housing for recent refugees or people with mental disabilities? We would allocate, say, if we bought a unit of 10 units, we would allocate 3 of those units to one of those services, and they provide the support to those individual tenants while we remain on the property management on the whole side of the building. So that's a model we're thinking about. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think also the takeaway here is that you could pick a model and then maybe change as you grow. You know, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that you might do everything in-house one day. So yeah, try something, but it's not set in stone, and you can move between different models that work. Do we have time for questions? We do not have time for questions. Okay. Just come find one of us if you have any questions about any of the stuff that we talked about or anything else. Thank you very much. Or yeah, right now. We're not going anywhere. Yeah, we're not going anywhere.
Next door, Circle is doing a session. Yeah. So you can hear more about their model.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.